Great and powerful Tom.
Hey, we're on the air.
It's the great and powerful Tom.
Great.
Don't look behind the curtain.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. I think we actually have some viewers too watching. So welcome everyone.
Hello.
Live Q&A with game designer Ryan Miller and the Jasco Games team.
Or at least part of the Jasco Games team.
Huh?
Part of the Jasco Games.
Part of the Jasco Games team. Yeah, not all of them. So we have. We're obviously going to be talking mostly about the Dead Meat Kickstarter, which is currently live. The link should be on your side. Someone confirm that it is the side of the screen. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Let me look. There's the chat.
Can you guys see me?
No,
you just disappeared.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yes, the Dead Meat. By the way, the Dead Meat's on the showcase.
Yeah.
You have to choose showcase.
Dead Meat is under the showcase. So yeah, that's the Kickstarter that's currently happening. Ryan, do you want to just give a brief overview of the game since you designed it, and we can kind of. Most people here probably are familiar with it, but just in case there's people who don't.
Sure. So Dead Meat is a miniatures combat game. It's a skirmish war game of urban combat in the zombie apocalypse. So each player develops their own team of survivors and pits them against another team in the wasteland. So it takes place about 4 years into the apocalypse. Instead of the night the zombie shows up. It also focuses more on that human versus human conflict. The zombies are more of a catalyst or moving terrain that's trying to kill you. But it's mainly about people and what they're willing to do to survive.
Awesome. Yeah, and so you approached the Jasco Games team with this awesome idea, and Kickstarter is launched. It's doing pretty well. It launched on Halloween, and it goes until November 25th. So, yeah.
Back it.
Back it, please. So, today we had a couple of things get posted out. We talked about the new miniatures that we previewed. They are going to be unlocked, hopefully at some point soon. What is your inspiration when you're designing these characters, Ryan? What are you drawing on mostly?
I've been a zombie fan for a long time, and apocalyptic fiction fan, and one thing that is kind of odd about zombie fiction is that there's a high level, like the audience requires a high level of realism, which is kind of ironic to me because of the idea of corpses walking around. But I think it's that gritty realism that
corpses don't just walk around.
Well, let's hope not.
So lied to.
When I was coming up with the world, a couple things had come to mind when I was thinking about, what if I did my own, zombie fiction or zombie world to set a game in, and a couple things did come to mind. One is that I believe the core of the horror of the zombie genre is not zombies. The core is people and the crappy things they're willing to do to each other in order to survive. It's what I said in the Kickstarter video when I said, the golden rule has been replaced by the rule of survival, better them than me, right? It's that kind of horror that is actually pretty scary, and to me scarier than The Walking Dead because, The Walking Dead, once you know how to deal with them and what to do to them to kill them finally, they become kind of a known faction, or known factor rather, and but other people are really where the chaos comes from. So when I was thinking about Dead Meat, and I've been working on Dead Meat in some form or other. The story mostly for 9 years now, off and on. Just kind of coming up with a backstory and kind of my ideas on it. Another thing I noticed, is a lot of zombie fiction, a lot of movies. In that world that they're portraying, zombie fiction doesn't exist in that world. So in this world, the new Dawn of the Dead, which is one of my more favorite newer zombie movies, is a great example of this because the dead start walking around and no one knows how to kill them, and it's just this huge, what do we do? They're unkillable, and everyone in the audience is going, shoot him in the head, shoot him in the head. We all know this. And I thought, well, that's, what if you just embrace that? What if there is, and I'm not the first person to think of this, but what if there is a zombie story where the zombie genre exists within that story? And that's when I came up with the idea of that, that George Romero was paid by the government to make these films. Like, well, these films existed, but they were actually a way for the government to train the populace on how to kill zombies without causing mass panic. So it was all a conspiracy, to kind of convey that information. And so it worked. Everyone knows how to kill zombies. But unfortunately, what those films didn't do is help you deal with the psychological aspects of having to kill someone that maybe you knew or that was special to you, but now is a zombie. But then I just started thinking in my head of like, well, how would things progress? How in this kind of world, and I try to stick to real emotions and real kind of as real as I can think of them anyway. And that's kind of where some of the like the cult came from that, right? Like the cult came from this idea I had of, some people get this kind of Stockholm syndrome where they begin to look at their enemy in kind of a positive light, and with the cult especially, they were ostracized. Many of these infected people were ostracized, and so they had to band together. And of course, so in that kind of environment, it would be natural for some people to take charge and maybe turn it into more of a spiritual movement, that sort of thing. So. Yeah. Really, I try to just kind of tap into those story elements that kind of have a sense of like, I could see that actually happening, even though it's in a place now that's completely crazy and psychotic.
Yeah, absolutely. Specifically, so for those who are tuning in, I have a monitor over here, and I'm referring to my notes in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. We previewed a couple other sculpts and minis that could potentially be in the game, and I think really it kind of dives into your what you were talking about, kind of how people would adapt to it. I mean, there's obviously some fantasy involved, like the Butcher.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's pretty hardcore, chopping off your own arms for food.
A man's got to eat.
Yeah, right. Well, it's one of the things that I like about being 4 years into the apocalypse is, I mean, some games, the night the zombie showed up kind of stance, and that's fine, and there's a lot of fun there, I think. But the being 4 years in is kind of nice because we can explore these. It becomes somewhat believable that a man would go to those lengths to to feed himself or to scare other people away, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, a lot of my inspiration, this is going to sound bad probably, but a lot of my inspiration was my work as a prison guard when I was in the Army, and seeing how people interact under these very tense situations, and so that kind of gave me some of the ideas that when everything is stripped away, you kind of have this basic economy of violence, right? You just have this basic, violence becomes currency, and so it's,
Well, and to even take it kind of another step when you have there's been at least a couple of movies where people have come out and said like, hey, what about what would the premise be if what if the I don't know what happened there, but
sorry, I think we just for a second.
What's
Sorry.
happening? What's happening?
Yeah, I just said Josh open smile. I was like, yeah, show off the curve.
Josh does open smiles.
That's right. So, but again, there's been I think 2 movies where they talk about like what would happen, what would things be like if there was no law in order for 24 hours. You just do whatever you want, and kind of the psychological horror. And what I thought was interesting from a standpoint, like two very real world examples I thought was interesting, because I have a couple of friends who are into the prepping thing, and which is good because it actually helps writing stories about people prepping. But the interesting thing was you can look at 2 hurricanes in 2005 that hit both within the space of a month or so, because there was Katrina, and then there was one, I can't remember which one it was, that hit in Florida shortly after. And in Katrina, you really did see people kind of going crazy when society falls apart.
Yeah.
And yet, and then in the Florida situation, because I have relatives who were there, they were like, oh yeah, we all banded together. People brought out food, and we were helpful to each other, and it's kind of interesting to see the dichotomy of when a city is hit really, really hard, to see what happens in an urban setting, which is like what we talk about with Deadmeat, versus what happens in kind of more of a suburb, neighborhood kind of aspect.
And I did similar research on my end, and it's actually kind of hard to find because those situations did kind of give us a glimpse as to what might happen, but really you don't know until because even in those situations there was still hope. There was still a world outside of this terrible thing that was happening, and there was hope to get back to that. And I think that once you take away that hope, like I read a really interesting book called The Great Mortality by John Kelly. And it's about the plagues of the 1300s, and specifically to read about like what did people do when that hope is gone, and they don't know what the future holds, and it was pretty interesting to see kind of what that's where like we get the flagellants like that. The flagellants were these people who go to town and basically just torture themselves to kind of repent before God to try to get them, get God to stop this plague and that sort of thing. And so it's just, to me, it's that. What do we do when there is no hope? There's no like going back, right? And examples of that are actually very, very hard to find. That's why I had to go all the way back to 1300s, right? Just all the way back to this terrible thing that happened that killed 2/3 of Europe, So it's something that I've found very interesting, and I've read quite a bit on just kind of get an idea of how things really go, and especially in our society. I think that. We have a standard of living that is unparalleled in history right now. And say what you will, but we really do, right? Especially in America. And I think what happens is that we get used to such a like just such a soft life that when that is stripped away, it is extra painful to us. And I think that's one of the reasons we see a lot of PTSD for returning combat soldiers, right? In World War II, those men, went over, and there was PTSD and there was shell shock, but I don't think nearly to this degree that we have now. And I think it's because we're used to living this kind of life, and when you have to get all the way down here, it can kind of But in World War II, I think more of the men were used to living on a farm or living off the land or things like that, and so they didn't have kind of the cushion that we enjoy now. And I'm not saying the cushion's bad, by the way. The cushion's very good.
It's pretty comfy right here, let me tell you.
Right?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Right? So it's a good thing. But I think it's just the higher you go, the more it hurts when you fall, right? And I think that one of the things that I try to illustrate in Dead Meat is that kind of like, wow, this is how far we've come. This is how far we've fallen because we were so high, because our denial was so heavy, and our ability to look at death as some kind of thing that will probably never happen, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I learned in The Great Mortality is that death was so close to everyone that it just became a part of the art. I mean, if you look at the art of the period, you look at you look at some of the architecture, some of those churches that are just filled with bones and skulls and things like that. It just became part of the noise of society, and we are so good now of kind of shutting that out that it's almost this fantastical thing that may happen, but maybe by the time I'm old, they'll figure out a way for me not to die. I don't know. And we got to do that. But when death is so close like that, it really takes away that denial, and that denial is the real cushion that we enjoy, right? That denial is the cushion that really helps us get out of bed and helps us to go to work. Without that denial, we can't function. We cannot function without it. So.
Well, it's interesting. On a slight side note about this, there was a point where I was talking with a guy I used to work with when I worked at a convent, and he was the head groundskeeper. He was head of maintenance division, and he has this thing where his mother-in-law, he married a Vietnamese woman, and his mother-in-law lived with them, and she had a cabinet full of drugs that had various things, prescription drugs and whatnot. And he was in really bad back pain one day, and he decides to take what he thought was a painkiller. But the problem was that he had a massive side effect to it, where he actually said that he became incapacitated because for the better part of 3 days he would actually think all the thoughts that you never think about during the day. Like, he was literally paralyzed because he thought to himself, like, I could go walk outside and literally die. Like, I could get into a car crash, I can have a bus hit me or something, and it paralyzed him with fear for that entire time. And that's what I'm talking about.
That's an excellent, well, because that's what it speaks to, because denial sounds bad. We say denial is a bad thing. Oh, you're living in denial. Denial's bad. Denial is very, what's that?
Isn't it a river in Egypt?
Yeah, it is that as well. But it's also a very important survival instinct. We have to live in some level of denial just to function, right? We have to deny get hit by a bus. We have to deny these things. And I believe PTSD is the effect of denial being stripped away, and me suddenly realizing that death is everywhere, and I could die at any moment, and our brains don't function very well under that, and I think that explains a lot of the underlying psychosis with Dead Meat, is that once you have something like this kind of an extinction level event, the people that survive through that tend to be a different kind of person. They are different, right? The soft, like, I wouldn't last very long. I'd tell you that right now. I'm way too soft. But so the people that do, the people that do survive through that, especially 4 years in, are just a different kind of human, and they've learned to adapt and survive in a different kind of world. And I think that to me is what's exciting about, writing about Dead Meat and kind of living in that world and kind of making it breathe and making it feel like a place that really exists, right?
Yeah. So everyone, because we had a couple new people tune in.
Hello.
This is the live stream and Q&A with Ryan Miller, lead designer of Dead Meat, the game that's currently on Kickstarter, and you can find a link to our Kickstarter in the showcase. Also, everyone, we are looking at the Q&A app, so if you have any questions, feel free to submit them, and we'll get them on the air. So questions about the game, question about Ryan Miller, questions about Jasco and what's going on there, just feel free to shoot away. So.
That's all
right. Okay, so a couple other things that we are going to talk about just while we wait for people to submit some questions. We had recently talked about sculpt improvements, and we just wanted to let everyone know that the things that we're showing aren't necessarily the final results just yet. Do you guys want to kind of dive into that a little bit more about what we meant and how we could see them improved?
When I met with Jasco to originally start this project, I made it very clear that I think in any miniatures game, the quality of the miniatures, both in the actual make and of the miniatures, but also the concepting, everything, the quality is by far the most important aspect any miniatures game. And of course, Jason and Tom and everyone there just said yes, of course.
That other guy.
That other guy, the guy with the headphones. Okay. I almost called you Nathan. So because I was trying to think of the other people at that meeting. But so the quality of both the concepting and the actual end result is by far the most important aspect of that. And so working with Tom, who is the lead guy on getting those sculpts done, has been great because he and I see eye to eye on that aspect. We want these. We have a high attention to detail on these things, and we just want to make the best toy soldiers we can make.
That's right. So and to be honest, I like one of the things that I really enjoy about doing this has been, Ryan came to us with, I really want this faction to look like this, and I want this faction to look like this, and we've kind of had some back and forth with that specifically. But for instance, when we started talking about like how, for instance, the Aegis, I'd already had an artist picked out because I really liked how his stuff looked and worked, and he, we gave him all this stuff. We're like, okay, we want like these night vision goggles because these aren't the night vision goggles that people normally see anymore. Because they're peripheral, and it's just like, at first I was just like, dude, don't they just show this in anime? And then no, these are actually like Ryan. She gave us a photo, like, no, look right here. I was like, wow, why are they wearing them during the daytime? But still, it was really eye-opening, and we had discussions about like what kind of weapons they're going to use, and can we use those weapons without like any sort of downfall and consequence, and, all this other stuff, just little nitpicky things, and then to have especially with Ryan's background in the military, and I would say the caliber of military movies that are coming out are a lot more realistic, a lot more visceral lately. So they're definitely like. What their advisors are like, no, they're going to look like this, and they're going to look like that, and getting that kind of attention to detail. For instance, Ryan likes to talk about how we got the Aegis guys, and they've all, like, for instance, the Hot Zone Commander was the first Aegis guy that we got, and his gun was here, and he had his finger solely on the trigger, and Ryan's like, no, that's just not going to work. And then we had to go. And then we had to go to the sculptor, and we were like, hey, we need his finger indexed, and he's just like, well, what's that? And I was like, well, it's like where it's resting. It's on the trigger. It's not like he just doesn't want to shoot off his foot, So.
There's details like that. And what I was going for, and I think what we've all been going for, is kind of this mix of stuff that you might be familiar with and stuff that is a bit postmodern, especially with Aegis, because Aegis had technology that no one else had seen before the bigger outbreaks had started in India. So we just wanted to kind of mix that. And that's where like the 4-tube NVGs that the Navy SEALs are using these days kind of came in really nicely there, because they look like some kind of weird sci-fi piece of equipment, but they're totally a legit, in use kind of thing. And so that kind of mixture of the familiar, like we've got plenty of AK-47s and L rifles and that sort of thing. That mix of the familiar with something just a little, postmodern, I think adds a really nice kind of flair to it, and that's most evident in the Aegis figures, definitely.
I think the only thing we're missing is Kevin Spacey, because that guy's like everywhere, in every war.
Don't forget Kevin Bacon,
Yeah.
Can't forget him either.
But I also think it's very important for each faction to kind of have their own visual home to live in, right? And each kind of looking different than the other. And it was a bit tough to do in a post-apocalyptic world, because, I mean, if you look at some of the games that are out there, like one of my favorite games of all time is Fallout 3. And Fallout 3, I've played that game incessantly, and they struggled with kind of visual style with the different factions.
Yeah.
And to this day, I can only recall 3 distinct visual styles, and one is just the Wanderers, right? Anyone in the Wasteland, and then there's the what are they called? But the big orc-looking guys, the big green mutant guys, and then the Brotherhood, which had the big power armor. So it's a bit difficult, and so I know when I was first talking to Jasco, the Patriots didn't exist yet. It was just kind of an idea I had. And I was telling Tom and Jason about this other faction called the Scavengers, and the Scavengers kind of represent like the ragtag groups of survivors, and I could kind of hear them kind of going, like it's kind of like it's kind of boring. And I said, oh well, let me tell you about this other idea I had, and that's when I told them about the Patriots, and the reason I bring that up is just an example of like that. The Patriots just had way more visual kind of sexiness, if you will. Than a ragtag group of like, hey, a trucker and a nurse and a secretary walk into a bar and shoot a zombie. Or whatever. Just had a much more visual style, much more descriptive, and you could kind of. They just had a better story. They had these guys that just believe in America, and they believe in what it used to be, and they feel like the government is the reason that we're where we are now, and they're the ones who eventually toppled the government. Which had the unfortunate side effect of allowing the virus to kind of take over the North American continent. But,
Oh, well.
But, unintended consequences, I guess. But, yeah, so it's that kind of like, we wanted everybody to kind of look differently. I mean, it's one of the reasons the cult, so one of the things that happens when you get infected is you lose your hair, which means I'm mostly a cultist right now. I'm getting there. But that's one of the reasons is it's a strong visual cue. I mean, you see the cult, and you can kind of see that's why they have a lot of hoods and they, a lot of bald heads, and it really just sets them apart on the tabletop. And I think that's really important for a war game is to kind of have those groups. When you look at them on the table, you're like, oh, it's those guys, right? Oh, he's playing Patriots. That's cool, man. Or that guy's playing, Tribe. I think that's really important to have that. So I think we've done a decent job of that. I think we've done a really good job of kind of giving each one their own space.
Yeah. Hey, we got our first question.
Yes.
Sure.
Brandon wants to know, Ryan, why did you opt to partner with Jasco with Dead Meat?
Oh, sure. So
Dead Meat.
Yes. So I've known Jason for a while, and I've known Tom for a while. I worked with Tom. I was employee number 1 at Sabretooth Games back in 2001. And we did the 40K trading card game, we did Warcry, we did the Lord of the Rings miniatures game, that sort of thing. So when I was looking for a publisher for this game, the first thing I wanted was to make sure it was a company that had done minis before, and had done that process at least, right? Because I didn't want Dead Meat to be the test case for some company that wants to figure out how to do miniatures. That's just not cool, because in my experience, companies don't tend to do well when they're out of their wheelhouse. And so when I saw the work that they had done for the Mega Man board game and the minis that they were able to put out for that, and the high quality that and attention to detail that those miniatures had, made me feel very comfortable with these guys. Also, one of my last my last few months at Sabretooth, I designed what would become the UFS game. I designed the basics for that, and then after I left, of course, Eric Yapel and Dave Freeman took it and ran with it. So when it went down and Sabretooth kind of let it go by the wayside, I was pretty sad. But then when Jasco picked it up, I was like, oh, that's really awesome, and especially seeing how well they're doing with it and that sort of thing. And so I kind of had already good feelings about Jasco. I feel like they want to make great games. They want to make fun games, and so I felt pretty comfortable with Dead Meat. Dead Meat is a project that I've been working on for so long that it's like I believe this game belongs on people's tables. Like, it is something that is a blast. It's and so I wanted to make sure I went with the right company, and I feel like Jasco was that company.
Well, and I would say it was actually quite the fortuitous meeting, because we Jason, myself, and Nathan we were all at Gamma, and
Lily.
Yes, and Lily. Lily was there, but we had actually discussed, like, we need more. We need more than just UFS, because I mean we were in a period of growth where we were adding more employees and trying to make sure that, hey, if we grow like this, we've got to be able to sustain this, and we need more games. And obviously at that point Mega Man had funded. We were still knee deep in the approval process and everything, but we were basically like looking for more things, and then all of a sudden we bumped into Ryan in a hallway, and he's like, yeah, I've got stuff. I'm here talking to game manufacturers. And we're like, well, funny that word, game manufacturer. What are you talking about? And he said, well, I've got a couple things I'm throwing around, and he gave us a very brief synopsis of Dead Meat. He said basically it's like Mad Max meets the zombie apocalypse. and he literally all he did was just describe Six Legs. He was like, and this is what he looks like, and this is what it is. And we all started walking away, and Jason's just like, oh, another zombie game. I don't know. And we had set up a time to meet with Ryan to have him show us the game, and like Nathan was like, zombies are tough to sell because they're just everywhere, and I was just like, guys, this game talks to me. We need to sit down, and then Ryan, later we sat down in a food court.
Yeah.
Of all places, and we're using like salt shakers and ketchup things as scenery, and it was really like I was already kind of sold on the game at that point, so it wasn't like a difficult sale for me at all. But Jason, I'm sorry.
It was me.
Yeah, but Jason and I really had a fun knockdown, drag-out battle with just generic armies and whatnot. It was actually, I think the thing that I enjoyed most about it was it was the first time I realized that it's not really a zombie game, and that's really the thing. Like, for instance, when I talk to people about it and they say, oh, it's a zombie game, it's like, it's really not a zombie game. There's zombies in it, yeah, but it's like they're so different, because there was a point where I had sent one guy, which of course is always the bad thing to do in a horror movie, and I was like, oh, I'm going to totally like run around this side and I'm going to flank, because that's what I do in all these big games. Like, no problem. Like, he's got guns. He'll be fine. And then he got winged or something by one of Jason's guys. He got knocked down, and then Jason dropped like 2 or 3 zombies right next to him. And I got one guy all the way over to him, and then I'm like, yeah, I don't like this at all. And he just got the other way. And we're like, sorry, Bob, you're toast. Like, con Dios, and don't come after us later. And stuff. But it was really like the first time I saw, wow, this actually brings a lot of depth to the game. It's probably my favorite part.
Well, here, I mean, this isn't a question that anyone asked, but I know it's come up, in the Kickstarter discussion. Ryan, where do you see the game being differentiating itself from other tabletop games?
Sure. So, I mean, it definitely at its core is a really fun skirmish war game. Like, I'm a big fan of skirmish wargaming. I got into Mordheim when it came out in 1999, I want to say, 2000, something like that. And I just played that incessantly. What's that?
I think it was like 2000. They started with Warhammer Skirmish and then turned it into Warhammer.
Yeah, and I just remember I was a retail manager at the time, and it came into my store, and I started seeing these cool war bands, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And before that, I'd played 40K, which is, of course, 40 or 60 models aside and all this other stuff, which is, it can be a lot of fun. But I love immersion and I love storytelling, and it's just hard to get into a guy's story when he's one of 10 in a squad or something like that. And you've got 5 squads, that sort of thing. And so Mordheim for me was just kind of a new thing. I was like, well, this is really neat. And so I started playing that and really got into it. And so at its core, this game does draw its roots from that kind of, that awesome, skirmish battle action. But where it's different, I think, is in a couple of ways. I think one is the action point system itself. I always say it's random actions. You don't know how many actions you're going to get, and I think some people think that means that it's like a linear curve. Like I roll a d4 and that's how many actions he gets, but that's not it at all. You actually roll d6s, and the number of dice you roll depends on the guy's stat, his initiative stat, and you get an action for every 4 or 5 or 6 you roll. So it's actually much more bell curve than I think some people got the impression of. So you can roll 0 actions, and it definitely happens, but it's not very common. But what it does is it provides for that feeling of drama. And that's one thing I don't see in a lot of minis gaming, other than the rolling of the dice itself. Any minis game with dice will have that level of drama. But what I've noticed with Dead Meat is it has this drama of I don't know if I can make it across the street. I don't know if I can make it my teammate. I don't know if I'm going to get enough shots to kill that guy over there. And you've got to do the best you can with the team that you have and how they're dealing with it. And it also provides a ton of story, because you can kind of see when a guy whiffs or maybe he gets a ton of action points, you can it doesn't take a big leap to see maybe in the story way why he did that or what happened. And one of my favorite examples of this, actually, I was playing with my wife, Amanda, and she had this sniper guy, and on her first turn just kind of snipes one of my guys, just drops him, and I'm like, oh. But on my next turn, the 2 guys that had been standing next to that guy that got killed, both of them failed to roll any action points whatsoever. And to me, I just thought that was hilarious, because it's yeah, they're freaking out, right? They just saw their buddy get,
Absolutely.
So it adds this level of drama and storytelling that I just haven't seen in a ton of war games. Now, the other thing that I'll say about that is that there is the command phase that comes right after the action phase. And those of you that have looked at the quick start rules will know what I'm talking about. The command phase lets your commander kind of issue orders to people around him, and so that's a good way to shore up if you do got guys that didn't roll a ton of action points. But so that's probably my favorite system is that kind of system of you don't know how good a guy's going to do every turn, and so you can't make perfect plans. And a couple of I think the zombie system is probably the other thing that I really think sets it apart. The way the zombies work is that the more noise your opponent makes, the more dice you get into your zombie dice pool. And at the end of your turn, you get to roll those dice to see how many zombies you get to deploy. So there's a lot of fun and a lot of strategy in where you deploy your zombies, because you can use those zombies, that deployment of those zombies, to kind of channel your opponent or keep them from a certain area or make life really hard for them. Now, once zombies are on the table, no one controls them. They just have kind of a program that they follow. But that aspect of it really worked out nicely, and from a design standpoint, the zombies were the toughest concept to design for. Getting the zombies right was absolutely the hardest part of this game design, and I think that's because the rest of the design kind of fell together really well. It's very intuitive, it's very fast playing, and it feels, it's a lot of fun. So those are the two things. I'd say from a thematic standpoint, a couple of things come to mind. I think definitely that this is a human versus human game. It's not the first game to do that. I totally realize that. But if you look at kind of the offerings that are out right now in the zombie genre, it's overwhelmingly, almost 9 out of 10, if not more, games are people versus zombies, which is a lot of fun. I played Left 4 Dead. I did all that stuff. It is fun. But to me, it kind of misses the point of the genre. It misses that survival, that kind of man against man, and George Romero's vision for this entire genre was that we are worse than the dead, right? We are worse, and so I wanted to make sure that came through in this game as well. And I think a couple other things too. I think I did a fun job in the world building of kind of meshing historical things with my own kind of altered history and kind of tying those things together, like George Romero being paid by the government to do these videos, that sort of thing. Like, our going into Iraq in 2003 was to find Saddam Hussein's stockpile of necrovirus and we couldn't talk about it, so that's why we had to, things like that kind of tie stuff together. What's that?
The first rule of necrovirus.
Yeah, don't talk about it. Well, I mean, that's the thing. It's, like in the backstory of Dead Meat, of course, the Western Allies find out about necrovirus in 1943, and that's when the CDC is created. It was called something else, ONDMCA, something about malaria or something like that.
Yeah, it was like the Office of Malaria Control.
Yeah, and that's a real thing. They really did that in 1943, but in my kind of altered history, they did it as a cover so that they could make sure that knowledge of this virus doesn't even get out, let alone the virus itself. So I think I did some fun stuff that set it apart. And the final thing I'd say is that this takes place 4 years in, and I know you've heard me say that a bunch, but I do believe that's another thing that separates us from zombie games that are currently out. Is a lot of them are like the night zombies showed up, and that's where you get like the truck driver and the cop and the nurse and the TV salesman all together trying to survive, which again is a very compelling story, but it's not the story I wanted to tell with Dead Meat. I wanted to really kind of fast forward a bit and show just how terrible things can get when there's 80% mortality rate, 80%, only 20% of the people in the world are left alive. Just how bad things can be.
Yeah.
Big things. I'm sure that you missed it.
No, absolutely. Okay, so we had a couple more people tune in. Again, I'll just repeat it. But if you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments or in the Q&A app, and we'll get to them. So, other than that, we're just hanging out, talking with Ryan Miller and Tom Kohler and Jason Hronsky, all of Jasco Games. So,
well, not all of Jasco Games, but the really important people.
What do you want from me, Tom? Gee. Well, okay. Speaking of the game, I mean, we've done a lot of speaking on the game.
We're gonna do more.
I do like to talk about Dead Meat, that's for sure.
Yeah, at least for another 20 minutes. So, so there are going to be a couple opportunities for people to see demos of the game. We've talked about a couple of them. Do you guys want to dive into some detail?
Let's see. This weekend, I'm pulling up my calendar right now, so pardon me. This weekend I'll be at Drop Zone Games, which is in Glen Burnie, Maryland. And that's a really cool shop, you guys. If you're in the area and you haven't seen Drop Zone Games, it's amazing. It is like a cathedral for minis wargaming. Like, it's the church for minis wargaming. It's insane. And the guys that run it are really great. Dan and Tom and those guys are really great. They've got a bunch of tables set up for minis gaming. They've got paint stations. You can just go there and paint if you want. Just sit there and paint all day. It's amazing. I'll be there at noon until probably about 5:30. Or they get tired of having me around. And then
about dead people.
Yeah, right. This guy again. This guy. And then on the 19th, I'll actually be on the West Coast. I'll be in Seattle at Card Kingdom, which is in Ballard there in Seattle. And that's another amazing store. Let me tell you that Card Kingdom's a beautiful store, really well done. And they are hosting a Dead Meat night there. That's a Wednesday. And it. Let's see, yeah, Wednesday night, it'll be from 7 o'clock till whenever. And I'm lining up a couple more, so watch the Kickstarter page for that. I basically just want to show this game to as many people as I can. So come on out if you can make it.
I was also going to say, this is actually something Ryan, myself, and Jason actually had a meeting scheduled for early this morning, which then probably is later today. But we are also looking tentatively at being at the Las Vegas Open, which happens in February, February. It's sometime around the 22nd. We're going to talk to Ryan about his ability to show up for that, but we will probably, we're going to have an actual demo copy of Dead Meat to check out.
Yeah. I just booked my flight just now. All right. I'll be there. Oh man, I cannot wait to actually hold minis. I cannot wait for that. I gotta tell you guys, I'm just so excited about that.
Open is 7th, 8th, and 9th, right? Which is also the UFS Nationals or Worlds.
Yeah. It'd be Nationals.
U.S. Nationals.
Yeah, so that's kind of a nice coinciding
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, we'll probably be jumping back and forth, but we'll have, obviously someone will be at nationals all day, but
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good odds I'll be there for that. And I'll just, if you guys want to come and check out the game, I will do demos until I'm hoarse. I'll do it because I love playing this game and I love showing people the game and had a lot of fun already. I went out to Huzzah Hobbies a week ago and talked to a bunch of guys out there and played a few games with the gang out there. It's my second time at Drop Zone. I actually went to Drop Zone a couple weeks ago as well. And had a lot of fun. This time it'll be on a Saturday, so we'll have more people. And I heard at least one of the backers is coming. I saw one of the backers kind of mention that he was coming. Steven Walk said he might be there. So all right, more backers, come on out. I'd love to talk Dead Meat with you guys.
And one thing about just to, because we've told people on a couple of occasions that we're really, really jazzed about this project. That we're super excited.
That's a really modern word, by the way.
Jazz.
Is that a dig? Are you calling me old?
I am.
Anyway.
It's the cat's meow.
That's right. Shane. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to tell people, hey, we're you're making me lose my train of thought here. Oh my God.
Sorry.
Anyway, so one of our employees, Kagan, he actually has gone through, because we have obviously the test version of the rules as they stand at this moment. He's actually gone through and created armies for every single faction.
That's awesome.
And he's just like, I can't wait. We had talked about the potential of having someone like cosplay at Gen Con as an Aegis trooper and all sorts of stuff. And he's just like, oh, no, that'll be me. That'll be me.
I sent Tom this picture. I already have a Patriots costume all ready to go. I even have like a tri-cornered hat and like a cool vest and stuff like that. Because I don't know, the Patriots I think are the ones I'm going to play, although I'm still undecided because all four of them sound pretty fun. But yeah, I think the Patriots. I've got my rule book right here. Classified.
Nice.
I'll give you guys a quick. Oh jeez, what's in it? Oh jeez. Oh look at that. Classified.
Someone's gonna screen grab that and enlarge it.
If we're lucky. Yeah. I would love if someone was that into this idea that they wanted to do that. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, we got 15 minutes left. Feel free to post any final questions you have for Ryan. In the meantime, let's talk about something that we haven't really talked about before. Let's talk about the campaign. How's it going to work? What's it going to look like? Take it away.
Yeah, so I'm actually in the process of designing that system now. I've got most of it sketched out, and we're playtesting some of it now, so you guys are getting, like, as it's happening kind of info here. The thing about campaigns, I love campaigns. I mean, that's what Mordheim did very well, I felt, and they were a lot of fun. And so I don't think I want to deviate. I don't want to, like, innovate this brand new way to do, campaigns. So what I'm looking at now is a very simple, like, XP system that your guys gain XP. Well, let me back up because army building kind of plays into this, and the army building for Dead Meat is mostly predictable. It's you start with a point value. Most armies are 400 points. There's two classes of models. There's heroes and there's grunts. And your heroes, any of the heroes that are in your army's list, can be the leader. And you make him the leader by paying an extra point cost, which is his leader ability. So each listing will have like, well, here's the sniper, but here's the sniper's leader ability. So by paying that cost, you make him your leader. And so the neat thing about that is that each army has potentially, 4 to 5 different leaders, each with their own different ability. But you can only have one in your army, so you've got to you can make a bunch of different types of armies out of each faction. So the reason for all that is so the XP system will work a little differently. Heroes will gain the XP that they can use to try to increase their stats. Grunts will gain XP that they can use to try to become heroes, right? So, like for example, we've got the Plague Sisters in the cult, and they can eventually become, like, if a Plague Sister survives enough and gets enough XP, they can upgrade to Mother Superior, which is the hero version of the Plague Sister. So that's the basic, yeah, right. That's the basic deal right there. There's a lot of fun. One of the things I love about campaigns is they really give a lot of story to your warband. Especially when you name your guys and you kind of follow them through, and you lose a guy, and now you got to rename it because he gets a replacement or something like that. It really adds a level of immersion to a war game that is a lot of fun, and obviously we're not the first to do it, but I love what it does. The other thing is that it ties into the scenario system. So the scenario system I'm actually pretty excited about because it's a little different than what most war games do. It's called in most war games you do have like a scenario of like, hey, we're fighting a I don't know, a take and hold scenario where like one of you might be, trying to hold an area or something like that while I'm trying to attack it. And those are a lot of fun. What I wanted to do with Dead Meat was something a little different, and I wanted to add a bit more replayability because the problem with traditional scenarios is you can only include so many in the rulebook. So I wanted to explore a way to increase that. And so what I've done is create a system called encounters, and the way that works is that when you play an encounter game, each player rolls to see what during this encounter. And the idea is that your team was out doing something, the enemy team was out doing something else, and you guys bumped into each other out in the wasteland. So you might be on a supply run, but I might be running away from a threat that happened off board or something like that. So each of us has different objectives and different deployment zones depending on the missions that we generated. And there are 3 generic missions, and there are 3 missions specific to each faction. So when you roll a 6-sided die to see which mission you have a 50-50 shot of having either a generic mission or one that's specific to the faction that you're playing. So it's the 2 missions that makes the scenario that you'll play. And what that means is because of all those different missions, there's basically 255 different combinations. So there's 255 scenarios in the base rulebook alone. And it adds a lot of flavor too, because of that feeling of like, my Patriot warband is low on bullets, and so we're out looking for bullets, and we run into Aegis, who is trying to set a beacon to attract a bunch of undead, and now we got to fight our way through this so that one of us can, be victorious, that sort of thing. So it adds a lot of story. It really feels like a Survivor kind of game. So that all ties into, of course, as if you're playing a campaign, in addition to these encounters. That the more your guys do to kind of gain victory points, the more XP that they'll gain. They also gain XP for just surviving battles, so that they eventually become more veteran virgins. So that's a kind of basics of what we're working on right now.
Very cool.
If we'd like, we actually got the initial pass of the Plague Mother, and I was just here real fast.
An exclusive sneak preview, huh?
Yeah. So hopefully.
Yes. I just saw this. So if you take a look at her, you see some details that are pretty fun. So the Plague Mother, or the Mother Superior, as her final name is. Plague Mother is like the playtest name. So so the cult, they believe that the virus will eventually turn somebody into a zombie, but that person will maintain their sentience. So one of the things the cult wants to do is spread the virus, because the more people they give it to, the better their shot of finding this person, this prophet that's supposed to usher in this new era of immortality. So Mother Superior leads the Plague Sisters, and they are like the close combat squad of the cult. And that's why you see she's got a couple of katanas, and she's got kind of this armor and that sort of thing. So one of the things that the Plague Sisters do is when they wound or kill an enemy, they will often cut their own arm and bleed into the wound so that they can pass along that virus. And so if you'll notice on her arms, you can see some scarring as she's been in a lot of battles and kind of, I can see my forehead too. Ooh, what's up? But it's just details like that kind of bring the world. And then the other thing you'll notice is the feathers around her neck, and that's because the cult kind of view themselves as the angels of death and the kind of the angels of this new world order, and so they use a lot of feathers, mostly black feathers, in their kind of imagery and their kind of in their religious imagery. So she's a great example of kind of what we're talking about here. She just looks like, she just looks badass.
We do want to add the little tagline here of copyright 2014 Jesco Game. So people know.
You actually can't see it on the screen, but
so I just let it go.
It's copyrighted.
It was just a little tease.
Don't touch it.
That's crazy.
So, but yeah.
Well, I mean, that's pretty much all we had to talk about.
I was going to say, personally, especially because we've talked about like factions that we like and all that. When Ryan explained all the factions and what they were, and we decided that we were going to do Patriots and stuff like that. One of the things that hit me was I was all, oh man, I totally, absolutely, 100% going to play the Aegis. There's no question. There's nothing. And as I go along, and I'm of course working with the sculptors and the concept artists and stuff, and I'm just like, wow, this like the cult just start calling out like, hey, you could join us too. Like, we look really sweet. And I'm like, yeah.
The cult are really fun to play too because most of the cult models are infected, and that means that no matter how they die, they'll turn into zombies. And so they're kind of interesting to kind of rush a bunch of infected at your opponent, and even if they get killed, they just come back as zombies and make your. I mean, they're a lot of fun to play. They really play differently than every other faction, and each faction does have its own mechanical space to live in. But I gotta say, as far as play style is concerned, the cult has a really fun pattern of like, I'm gonna run at you, and you can shoot me if you want. But I'm going to keep running even after you kill me.
Well, and based on I don't remember if we talked about this in the rules or not. But since it's a skirmish game, you have a morale score, and
yeah.
when your morale is reduced to a certain point, that's when your guys bug out and say it's time to go home. And so, from what I've been reading in the rules and everything, it's more interesting with the cult of how you're going to balance that morale versus. Morale loss versus like just run my guys to plant a zombie somewhere really interesting. So and actually one of the cool things like the Aegis, because we talk about how they're cold and calculating and willing to kill people, and I think it's the Hot Zone Commander has an ability where he can just shoot somebody.
His ability is
not suffer from morale loss.
Yeah, it's called For the Good of the Many, and it's an ability that allows him to kill a wounded ally but not lose any morale for it. And it's one of those things where you look at it and you're like, why would I want to do that? But when you play the game, it's actually very good. It's a very good ability.
I'll take your mind off that everlasting.
The war's over for you, brother.
That's
over. Dark, man. It's dark.
Yeah, but it's good stuff. I mean, that's the thing. And I'm again with the zombies and the placement of zombies, like for instance, one of the things in other games, like especially futuristic sci-fi kind of tabletop games, there's always this question of like, why is there hand-to-hand combat? Because let's face it, like bayonet charges are just not what they used to be, and whatnot, and so it's I mean while close quarter fighting, especially in an urban setting, can happen, it's not like in the skirmish games or in the big war games where you're running across the field and you've got dedicated hand-to-hand specialists who are like, I'm going to get close and cut you up. Like, there's no way. And the one thing that I really liked about this was that, again, it's just kind of that attention to detail, but hitting someone over the head with a bat is a whole lot more quiet than shooting someone.
Right.
So and so therefore there were definitive times like because I want to say in our demo game with Jason and I mean we were just literally lighting it up like every single day. Oh, you got a gun? Let's shoot. And eventually all of a sudden it's like, why is Ryan putting all these dice over here? Like this pile just keeps growing, and I don't like that. Because it's all over there. Yeah. And then all of a sudden he's like, yeah, well, you get to roll. And Jason, I mean, thankfully Jason didn't pull out a bunch, but he got like 4 zombies on his first turn.
It kind of speaks to one of my design philosophies is that I'd always rather do ramifications than rules. So like, and you can't always get away with this, but I'd always rather just say, hey, do whatever you want. There's just ramifications for what you do, right? Because then you end up making decisions that a person in the world would make, and that's kind of the quintessential style of immersion that I like to bring. So the melee thing's a good example of that because I've demoed this game hundreds of times, and almost every time when I tell them about noise and the zombie phase and all that stuff, the first thing they'll say is, man, I got to get some bats. I got to get some axes, and it's just like that's exactly what someone would say in that world,
It's a trick. Get an axe.
And the other rule that I like that kind of does this is when one of your guys gets knocked down. So getting knocked down is kind of one of the ways you guys get wounded. Like when you guys get hurt, you knock the model down. I've always liked that. It's something Mordheim did, but I've always liked that because it's very immersive. You see it on the table, guys getting knocked down. But one of the ways to get back up is for a buddy to come over and help him up. And I really like that because it adds this level of like, you don't have to if you don't want to. There's another way he can get up. It's just not as easy. And so it really, encourages this style of play that is very immersive and very kind of, it feels real. It feels like, okay, well, like in Tom's example, you don't want to send a guy off on his own because if he gets knocked down, it's going to be much harder for him to get back up again. I've always striven for that kind of level of like, I'll give you a set of ramifications. You can do whatever you want, but the ramifications will eventually help guide your decisions and make you feel like you're in this world that I want you to live in. So.
Very cool. Well, I think that's pretty much it for our time tonight.
Thanks for watching.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think
we should ask if there's any last-minute questions.
Yeah, any questions?
Any last-minute questions? Obviously, if you don't want to submit them here, we'll be watching the Kickstarter comments, and we'll be sure.
Ryan was even so nice to put his Twitter handle up there.
Yeah.
It's DOT Ryan or .Ryan. So feel free if you have a question. I just didn't want to miss any questions if I accidentally, stepped away from keyboard for a while and just didn't see it. But if you guys have any questions, dude, you probably noticed in this particular instance, I'm always happy to talk dead meat. So, let me know if you have a question. Please let me know.
And I would just have a shout out to our backer. We talked about this in a very recent comment, but obviously, I mean, it's imperative. Obviously, I mean, plenty of. I'm sure everyone here has used Kickstarter, but just as a friendly reminder, the popularity of this Kickstarter, as far as it is on Kickstarter's page, is usually based on how many people you're getting to back. Yes, sorry, I'm totally lost. It's what we call a senior moment. I'm sorry. Anyway.
All good.
So basically, if you can get your friends out there and back, even if it's just for $1, it doesn't really matter. They can watch they can watch the campaign, they can get updates, but it also helps bring the campaign back into the limelight, so to speak, the upper pages of Discovery, and we're certainly jazzed about the game. That's the old word again. We're happy. We're excited. We think that we have. We think that we have a really amazing product out here, and we would be the first to admit that we've adjusted stuff, and we understand that there's especially I've read some messages. It's kind of confusing on the pledge levels, and people can feel free to message us, and we'll respond quickly. But again, it's trying to get that momentum going on the Kickstarter page specifically to draw in those people who wouldn't normally be there. So if you can talk to your friends. I mean, I have friends who aren't into minis games, but they've pledged a couple bucks because they're just like, well, I want to support this, and I really think what you're doing is good, and we're all very passionate about the project ourselves. So.
Yep.
On the topic of jazz, in college, I took history of jazz, and every day in that class, I was just writing game design rules into my spirals.
You were jazzed about game rules? Is that what?
I've been doing that too. I've been ever since I still have notebooks from when I was like 16 and 15 or 14 of game designs and ideas and stuff. It's I've been doing that too. It's addicting, this game design thing.
It is addictive.
Yeah. All right.
Well, that's gonna be it. So,
and if people, I'm guessing that if people want more of these in the future, like we can do more. That's
absolutely.
And thank you guys. If there are any backers watching, thank you for backing. That's amazing.
Yes.
You guys believe in our project and want to actually put your money where your mouth is. That's amazing. So thank you for that. Thank you for backing my game, my world that I've made, and hopefully we'll be able to send it to you, and you'll get to play in that world too, and it'll be awesome. And we'll roll some dice, and it'll be fun. But I want to thank you guys for doing that. That's awesome. So thank you.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, all right, well, that's going to be it for tonight. And like Tom said, if you guys are interested in doing more of these, just let us know, and we'll be more than happy to get them set up. So, but for now, thanks for tuning in. If you missed the show, it will be recorded, and we will get that link shared so you can watch it from beginning to end. So, But yeah. Anyway, have a good night, everyone, and thanks for watching. And please consider pledging. So.
Thank you.
Hit me.
Goodbye.